to talk a little bit about GulpJS. So try to avoid going the route that almost everyone else takes when talking about GulpJS of doing the gulp versus grunt debate. So I'm just going to try and take the approach of just talking about GulpJS as if we'd never gone down the route of talking about grunt before. Unfortunately, grunt has existed for a while and existed for a while before gulp showed up. So when talking about gulp, it'll be almost inevitable to make a few of those comparisons. So kind of bear with me as we go through it. I'll try and not pick on grunt because when learning grunt, I didn't enjoy it. While using grunt, I don't enjoy it. Learning gulp and using gulp, I liked it. So I'm a little bit biased there. So this is me. I'm Paul. So what is gulp? Gulp is a streaming build system or task runner. You use it for all kinds of things. You can compile down your J and your Sass. You can compress your images. You can minify your code, concatenate your code. You can run all kinds of random tasks. You can run your automated test. You can run your end-to-end test. You can run protractor. The reason why we're talking about it is because you can run pre-minification steps for Angular apps. Let's see, you can run all kinds of other build tasks. You can basically run any kind of code that you could run in any kind of node application, basically. So let's take a step back here and actually go visit the Gulp website and see what they have to say about it. So they make a sales pitch here about why they think you should use it. They like to talk about it as being code over configuration. And this is one of those points that, when you're talking about Gulp, you almost can't help but compare it to grunt. One of their big sales pitch is that when you're writing Gulp files, you're actually writing code. You're not trying to type up a configuration file that's loaded up, and then when grunt executes reading your configuration file, doing what it's supposed to based upon that. With Gulp, you're actually executing a series of commands. So that's one thing that Gulp does a little bit differently than grunt. And another thing that is different about Gulp is that it actually uses streams to process a batch of files. It also has a very small API. We're actually going to cover the entire API in this talk. It's got 4 commands, 4 functions in the entire API. And another thing is the plugin infrastructure. It's got actually has some monitoring of plugins that go into it. So it's actually to get published in their plugins library, you actually have to get a little bit of testing, a little bit of review in there, so they don't just accept whatever submitted. So a little bit better library for that. So I mentioned that Gulp uses streams. Why is this a big deal? Why does it matter? So let's consider this example. This example, though not directly relevant to Gulp, is just kind of a reason why streams are just useful in general. This is a sample of a very, very simple HTTP server where they are loading up a data.txt file upon request and serving it. Real simple. Now imagine data.txt was a 5 megabit file and you have a couple thousand concurrent users requesting this file at once. What's going to happen is this 5 megabit file gets loaded entirely into memory before the request even begins to be served back to the user. So the user's waiting around for that 5 megabit file to get loaded into memory before they even begin to receive a notification that the request is being handled. And then you've got this entire 5 megabit file sitting around in memory for all several thousand users for the entire duration of the time that the user's sitting on their slow dial-up connection waiting for it to be downloaded. So the entire server is going to get bogged down with all these memory requests. Right here, same amount of code. We've just replaced reading the file into memory with reading it into a stream and serving it. So now, as the file is read from disk, in chunks, is being sent straight to the user. And now, instead of loading up the entire file, they just send a little bit at a time. The memory is being freed up as it's being sent to them. You're only holding as much resources as you need at a time. The user's seeing the response as it's getting read. So you get immediate response, less resources being held onto, and you have a more responsive server. So in general, streams are looking pretty good. More relevant to Gulp, you've got the fact that you're batch processing a bunch of files. Let's say you've got a build process that requires, I don't know, half a dozen steps, and you've got 150 files, source files. That's over 700 different files that you're going to end up writing every time you change a single file during your development cycle. So it's going to be much quicker using these streams. Let's talk about the Gulp API. Like I said, 4 calls: source, dest, task, and watch. Source. Gulp.source, supply a glob, matches a file pattern. From there, we'll start piping on commands to various plugins. So the return of source is a set of files. And the return of a pipe, as a result of that operation, is again a set of files that we continue to pipe on. Pretty simple.
Is it a set of streams?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. So it is a stream of the content of those files. So dest, it is the opposite of source. It is where the pipe will put those files. So here, with source, we are obtaining files from here. In this example, we're piping them to a plugin called Jade. We're then piping those into this destination. Dest also happens to return the stream after it finishes placing them in that destination. So we can, in addition to placing them in .build/templates, we can then continue to pipe onto them as well. So after we've placed them here, we can continue to pipe, minify, and then continue on. Task. Task is where you actually do stuff. This is how you actually kick off the process of calling these minify tasks and these Jade tasks. So in this example, Gulp.task, you provide a name, and in this case they provided a callback function. And down here we have our default task, and they provide a list of dependencies that are other tasks within your Gulp file. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in just a moment. So what can you do in a task? Basically anything that you can do in any Node application. In this example here, they're actually using defer to write up some promises even. For this particular example, they're using it for the purpose of gaining some, not async, the opposite, they're actually trying to create a dependency that is synchronous, but you could use it for any purpose that you want. So in Gulp, they actually execute all the dependencies of a task asynchronously. So if we go back and look at this list here, if they were to add 3, 4, and 5 onto this list and have those listed here as well, they would all be executed asynchronously, provided that they didn't have any dependencies of their own. So if you have a list of tasks and you have a task that depends upon them, all of those tasks are executed at the same time. Now, why is this both a strength and a weakness? Well, it's a strength in that you end up with really fast concurrent processing of a lot of files. A weakness is that it actually kind of makes for a little bit of overhead when writing up your Gulp files. So let's take a look at what that entails for us. Well, that means that we have to actually provide annoying hints to Gulp to kind of develop this synchronous behavior in our task list. To do this, we can provide hints to our tasks in one of three ways. We can either tell our task to execute a callback, return a promise, or return a string. Take a peek at the documentation for this. So this is straight from the Gulp documentation. And here we are providing a hint of it calling a callback. Normally, you would just end up having your task perform some work and then piping to desk and then being done. Here they're actually returning the string that they use. And then we actually saw this example before where they create a defer object and promise from it, and they return that promise. And now, down here, we have our default task, which depends upon task 1 and 2. Now, like I said before, normally 1 and 2 would be kicked off at the same time. But because 2 depends on 1, 1 will be forced to execute first, followed by 2. And again, the only reason this works is because we provided a hint here in 1 in the form of calling a callback. So it's a real annoying, in my opinion, annoying nuance of Gulp that you have to provide these little hints that allow synchronous execution of these tasks. But it is what it is. So just a gotcha there that a lot of people run into when trying to execute these tasks synchronously. A reason why you actually don't want these things executing asynchronously is an example of when you want to process your J files and then turn around and start to, say, do your pre-minification for Angular would be an example of that. So that leaves us with the last one, watch. Watch will look at a file pattern, and if any files in that change, it will set off this list of tasks. Again, it will run those asynchronously. It will also call this particular function right here, or run this particular function right here for you. So let's talk about plugins.
Back on the watch, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I think in Grunt, there's no easy way to tell it that when one of those files changes, only run the task on that file. It just then run, like JS hint, for example, change any JavaScript file, run JS hint on every JavaScript file. Is this similar to that, or does it only run on the files that have been modified?
So this is a glop right here. So
right, but is the uglify task smart enough to only run on files that have been modified since the last time it ran?
I think that's going to depend entirely upon the utility.
Yeah.
This Gulp.watch unfortunately doesn't. There is, however, a plugin, Gulp-watch, that is. It is smart enough to, and I will actually show an example at the end that uses that, happens to use that plugin, that leaves a pipe open in the middle of a task that will watch all the files in a log, and if it detects any changes of any of those files, it will run that individual file back to the pipe.
Okay.
So I can actually show you an example of that.
Okay.
Pretty cool. So this is some of the plugins that we actually use. And you can probably guess right away from the names what they do, but I'll just kind of quickly run through them. GulpJ for compiling J to HTML, Unify CSS, Unify HTML for unifying CSS and HTML, J to SAS for SAS compilation, ng annotate. We just recently switched from ng-min, what was it? ng-min to ng annotate for pre-minification of Angular HTML, and then Bugify and JS do exactly that. I checked last night, and there are 605 plugins for Gulp as compared to the 3,000 something for Grunt, which, you know, that's a bit of a gap there, but again, Gulp has a bit of a monitoring system for the plugins library, so, and I don't actually know, do you guys know if Grunt has any sort of monitoring, or can anyone submit to it?
The ones that are blessed have the word contrib in their name, and there's a star next to them when you look them up, but that's it.
Okay, okay. And I don't actually know like the bar of acceptance for Gulp. I just know that that's something that they tout highly as being something that, you know, that there's supposed to be some level of acceptance there that goes on. So I just know that that's something that they pride themselves on. So
at this point, I've only ever used those blessed plugins. Is there an alt, you know, like we're talking about with Grunt, you've got the contrib, which is and then you've got everything else. Is there everything else anywhere for Gulp? I mean, other than things you write yourself?
It can be anything you can find on NPM.
Okay. So there's nothing stopping me from putting a plugin out there if I wanted to, but it not going through the approval process.
Right. You can find their blessed ones on their website, but you go about getting them the same way you get any other node package.
Just NPM install.
You hit NPM install. So yeah, you could NPM install and you just use require. And you'll see that, you know, here in a moment. You just use require to get it into your Gulp file. So yeah, you could mistakenly require something that's not even a node package and attempt to use it. Or so you could, yeah, require something that's not even a Gulp plugin and try and use it, and who knows the result of that. So the same thing with, you know, trying to go out and get something that they call Gulp-something and not even attempted to submit it to the Gulp plugin maintainers. So yeah, that's definitely possible. All right, so let's take a look at the file here that I feel. This is a really, really simple one. Doesn't use half of the examples I just gave, but I just kind of wanted to give a brief run through showing what it looks like. So to start off with, you actually list all of your plugins, give them a simple name. We've already talked about Jade, SAS. Watch is the plugin I mentioned earlier that will allow you to watch whatever comes through the pipe. If any of those changes, it will rerun it through the pipe. Any of those files, it will rerun that file that changed through the pipe. Plumber is used in conjunction with watch. If something were to happen further down the pipe and an error occurs, it will still allow you to capture that error while keeping the pipe open. So it will print out the error and keep the pipe open for watch to send any future changes back through. So let's actually, I'll show you an example of that here in a moment. So right here we've got our Gulp task that will look through my Jade folder for any Jade files, send them through the plumber through watch, finally into my Jade plugin, and stick the results into my www folder. This will simply send the same thing, send them through a watch for my SCSS files, into the SAS plugin, put them in my www CSS folder. Likewise, JavaScript's just actually copy them straight through. The reason why this is so simple is because this is the Gulp file for the project that was my demonstration, so there's not much to do here. And then my images I just passed through as well. Finally, down at the bottom, we have the Gulp task that actually puts all of these together. And this is the one that we'll actually call from the command line. So to execute this, we just say Gulp dev. Picks up the gulp file that is in here, which you named gulp file.js, and automatically goes to look for that file. It will look here for this name based upon the task that you supplied. So I supplied dev, found task name dev, looked at my dependency list and said, okay, so I need to kick off HTML, CSS, JS, and images, which it did. It's running these asynchronously because I don't have any dependencies listed for any of them, so all of these are running at the same time. It found one file, 3 files, and 8 files. So to answer your question, you were looking for a solution where if I change just one file, let's see here.
They find 8 JavaScript files?
So if I change a JavaScript file, so note that's 3. So let's change this file. That will break something, but I think I'm done with my presentation, so that'll be okay. Here, let's change this. So now if I save this, we should see that this will pick up the change. SAS complained, but it says just that one file was changed. SAS complained about my one file that changed.
So
And it left the pipe open for future changes, so now I can, actually no it didn't, because I didn't have plumber in that particular task. So if I come here and add plumber, pipe, save that. See, now it complained about it, didn't care, kept running the pipe, left my pipe open. Now if I come back here, fix my broken SAS file, save it, saw that it was changed, kept my pipe open.
So in your grunt file at the bottom, I'm assuming if you would have named that last task default instead of dev, then you would just run gulp?
Yes, that's exactly right. So just name this default, save it, move here to gulp, that off. I just ran gulp, picks up default as my default task.
Was there any reason for the empty callback there at the end of the task?
Callback. No, there's no reason for that at all.
You're not required, maybe you have to pass it a function.
I haven't had to in the ones that I've done.
Oh, okay.
I just didn't know if it was like the whole callback that signaled that a task was done or something. I thought that was necessary for something.
Is there any good reason to run watch without plumber?
Run watch without plumber. Yes, if you're doing something that you know isn't going to break. So right here, where I'm literally moving a file from A to B, if there are files, like there's no way that, there's no process in the middle that's going to emit an error.
Okay.
So there's, to run. So
I mean, would
if
it-
I add a file or remove a file, then this particular version, Gulp Watch, can also detect when files are added or removed, which the built-in watch cannot. So this one will then pick it up and shove it over into my www.js folder.
I guess I was wondering, would it make sense to just create your own watch that calls plumber and watch, and then you don't have to call plumber, you don't have to remember to type pipe plumber, pipe watch in each one of your, everything you want to watch. It might not be it. I was wondering if there, is there any downside to putting plumber in something? Is that gonna hurt anything?
Is there a downside to putting a plumber on something? Not really, other than the overhead of typing it.
That's okay.
that matter, it might as well be a different version of source that always pipes in plumber and watch.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm sure that's a matter of maturation, which is why that's the biggest argument against, that's really the only argument I've heard against the usage of Gulp as of today. A lot of people say that, it's just, still needs to brew a little bit longer before it beats out Grunt.
That was the thing that was keeping me from using it for a while, but it's so much nicer to deal with than Grunt that I've given up that fight. I'm just
Yeah.
So one of the main features I like about Grunt is the live reload feature of the watch. Do you know if Gulp has an equivalent?
It has it, and unfortunately, I didn't have time to get a good demo of that in.
Okay.
That does have that. Do you think you could do that on the spot?
Just
Okay.
telling me it works is enough.
I've
That's
literally
fine.
never live coded before, so
That's
that's been a
fine.
lot.
So you
I
set
did
it.
this to him yesterday in the class. I'm like, hey, you guys have moved from Grunt to Gulp. Can you just throw up on the board everything that you're working on and tell us all about it? He's like, okay.
I actually stripped those lines of code out of this file to strip this down to my
So
needs.
you could change any CSS, HTML, JavaScript file, and it will do whatever it needs to, and then it will refresh the browser.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's actually a plugin like Gulp Connect, I think it's called,
Yes.
that runs the server for the live reload and handles live reload. So all you have to do is run Gulp Connect on whatever port you want.
Okay.
Maybe like your project or whatever, and then you can connect to that. And use it.
It's funny that you like that. I hate my reload. It drives me
No, I can't live without it.
I hate it. I hate it so much.
All right, guys, that is it for me. Any questions? Any other questions? All right, thank you.